She was nobody. A girl in a second-hand apron carrying plates that cost more than her monthly rent, moving through a restaurant so far above her station that even the silverware seemed to look down at her. He was the man every other man in the room was afraid to meet eyes with. The son of the most dangerous family in all of Sicily, now commanding the most feared criminal empire in New York City. Their worlds were not supposed to touch. Ever. And yet, the night she set down that glass of wine without trembling, without flinching, without lowering her gaze, something in Luca Ferrante's chest cracked open. Something he had never once felt before. Something that was going to change everything. Welcome to Mafia Hometail Besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The restaurant was called Edder's, and it was the kind of place where reservations were made 3 months in advance and security wore tuxedos. The kind of place where the lighting was deliberately low, and the conversations were deliberately quiet, and the people at the corner table never looked at their menus because their orders were already known. Mia Carter had worked there for 6 weeks. She had gotten the job because she was fast, professional, and because she had a face that made even difficult guests feel somehow at ease. Her manager, Vincent, had told her on day 1 that certain tables were different, that certain guests were not to be kept waiting, not to be questioned, and not to be made uncomfortable in any way. She had nodded. She had understood. She had also told herself it had nothing to do with her. But the night Luca Ferrante arrived, something in the air changed before he even walked through the door. The other waitstaff straightened almost imperceptibly. Conversations at the bar dropped in volume. The sommelier practically floated across the floor to the corner booth before the party had even settled. Mia watched it all from the service station, her tray balanced against her hip, and thought, someone important just arrived. She was assigned the adjacent section, not his table. That was Marco's territory, and Marco had been working Edder's for 9 years and treated that corner booth like it was his personal inheritance. So Mia moved through her own tables, refilling glasses, delivering courses, offering that quiet smile that made her good at this job. She did not look at the corner booth. She had no reason to. Then one of her guests accidentally knocked an empty wine glass, and it rolled toward the edge of the table, and Mia lunged forward and caught it, and in the process turned slightly, and that was when she saw him for the first time. He was looking directly at her. Not at the room, not at the man speaking across the table from him. At her, dark eyes, the kind that processed everything without giving anything away. A jaw like something carved rather than grown, sharp and clean beneath the kind of stubble that was too precise to be accidental. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things fit powerful men, like it had been designed for that specific body and no other. He was not smiling. He was just watching, and somehow that was worse. Mia turned away, set the glass back down, exhaled quietly through her nose. It meant nothing. Powerful men looked at things. That was their whole personality. The next hour passed without incident. Mia cleared plates, managed a difficult guest at table 9 who had strong opinions about the acidity of his Barolo, and avoided looking at the corner booth with the kind of disciplined effort that meant she was absolutely thinking about the corner booth. She was almost through her second section's dessert course when she heard it. A sharp sound, a grunt of frustration, and then Marco's voice, low and appalled, saying, "I don't understand, sir, I don't." Mia turned. One of the men at Luca Ferrante's table, not Luca himself, one of the others, heavy-set and impatient-looking, had apparently sent his food back. Not quietly, the way most guests did, loudly enough that the nearest 2 tables had gone still. Marco stood with the plate in his hands looking like he might be sick. The kitchen would not remake it in time. The course had been custom and the chef was already on the next preparation. Mia knew this, because she had heard Vincent swearing about it 6 minutes ago over the earpiece. She made a decision she could not entirely explain. She crossed the room, not quickly enough to look panicked, not slowly enough to look indifferent. She reached the table, set her tray aside, and addressed the unhappy guest with the kind of calm that came not from training but from necessity, from years of working jobs where you simply could not afford to fall apart. She told him, in a voice that was clear and steady, that she had spoken with the kitchen and that the chef would be honoring a special preparation in approximately 7 minutes. She told him the delay was an honor, not an inconvenience, because the chef was doing it himself rather than delegating. She did not know if any of that was true. She would figure that out in 30 seconds when she got to the kitchen. The unhappy guest stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. Mia picked up her tray and walked toward the kitchen. She did not look at Luca Ferrante, but she felt his eyes on her back the entire way across the room. It was like walking through sunlight, warm and inescapable and impossible to ignore. Later that night, after the dinner service ended and the last guests had been seen out and the kitchen staff were breaking down their stations, Mia was collecting her things from the staff room when Vincent appeared in the doorway. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Mr. Ferrante asked for your name." Mia's hands stilled on her bag strap. "Which Mr. Ferrante?" Vincent's expression said everything. "The one you don't ask follow-up questions about." She said nothing. "He also left this." Vincent held out an envelope, crisp white, no label. Mia took it and opened it. Inside was a tip so large she read the number twice. Beneath it, written in a hand that was precise and unhurried, were 4 words. "You have steady hands." She stood there long enough that Vincent cleared his throat. She folded the note, put it in her pocket, told herself it was nothing, told herself she was not going to think about it. She thought about it the entire train ride home. The next day, she went to work and told herself last night was an anomaly. Luca Ferrante had dozens of restaurants he probably frequented, and she would likely never see him again, and even if she did, it would mean nothing. She had bills. She had a mother recovering from hip surgery and a walk-up in the Bronx. She had goals that did not involve complicated men in corner booths with eyes like black water and handwriting like a threat wrapped in silk. She was in the middle of a lunch service, moving fast and clean through a full section, when she felt it again. That shift in the air, that particular stillness that spread through a room like a sound no one could quite hear. She looked up. He was at a different table this time. Smaller, closer to the center of the room. No entourage, just one man across from him who was talking rapidly and looking at his hands a lot, the way people looked at their hands when they were nervous. Luca Ferrante was listening, perfectly still, completely focused. He had a glass of water in front of him and nothing else, and he was wearing a different suit from last night, dark blue this time, and he still had not looked up. Mia went back to her section. 2 minutes later, she was reaching past another table to refill a water glass, and she heard a voice say, quietly but absolutely clearly, "Miss Carter." She turned. He was looking at her, directly. The way he'd looked the night before, unhurried and precise, like she was something he was in the process of understanding. "I don't believe we were introduced properly," he said. His voice was low, accented but clean, Italian beneath the American years. Each word deliberate, like he was someone who had long ago decided not to waste anything. "We weren't introduced at all," Mia said. She didn't know why she said it like that, direct, maybe even a little pointed. The man across from him went very still. Luca Ferrante looked at her for one long moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something in the territory of one. "No," he agreed, "we weren't." He said nothing else. Mia finished refilling the water glass and moved back to her section and spent the next 45 minutes demonstrating what she felt was an impressive level of professional composure. She did not drop anything. She only thought about that almost smile approximately every 90 seconds, which she felt was acceptable under the circumstances. A few days later, she learned his name the way everyone who worked at Edder's eventually learned it. Not from a guest file or a reservation slip, but from the careful, lowered conversations of the older staff. Luca Ferrante, 34, son of Enzo Ferrante, who had built the family's operations across 3 decades of carefully managed violence and carefully managed legitimacy. Luca had inherited at 28 when Enzo had a stroke, and had proceeded to expand the empire in ways that made even the men who'd served his father look at him differently. He controlled import routes. He had arrangements with officials who publicly had no arrangements with anyone. He was, by every available measure, untouchable. He also, apparently, came to Edder's 3 times a week. Mia discovered this not from the staff gossip, but from the 3rd time she saw him there in 8 days and had to accept the math. She was managing a private event booking in the side dining room when she heard his voice through the partition wall, talking to someone on the phone in Italian, low and unhurried, and she stood very still and pretended to review her table map and told herself this was absolutely fine. It was not fine. She liked his voice. That was the problem. It was the kind of voice you felt rather than just heard, low and measured with a quality of absolute certainty underneath it, like someone who had spent his entire life knowing exactly where he stood and expecting the world to orient around that fact. She had met confident men before. She had waitressed through them for 3 years, but this was something different. This was not confidence performing for an audience. This was just what he was. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself that several more times over the following week. The following Thursday, Luca Ferrante was back, and he was seated in Mia's section. This was not an accident. She knew it was not an accident because Marco had looked at her with an expression she could not quite categorize when the host made the seating arrangement, and because 2 of the security men who came in behind Luca and took up positions near the entrance were watching Mia specifically as she crossed the room toward the booth. She had been assessed and cleared before she'd even set down the bread basket. She set down the bread basket. "Miss Carter," he said. Without looking up from the menu he was apparently actually reading, which surprised her because she had assumed men like him did not bother with menus. "Mr. Ferrante," she said. Then, because she could not help it, she added, "I thought you knew what you wanted before you arrived." He looked up then. She held his gaze. She wasn't entirely sure why. Some people under that kind of attention felt small. Mia felt, strangely, more like herself. "I do," he said. "I've been reviewing the wine list." "The wine list is on the back." A pause. He turned the menu over. "So it is." There it was again. That almost smile. That thing that was not quite warmth but was in the same neighborhood as it, the way a lit match was in the same neighborhood as a fire. She took his order. She brought his food. She refilled his glass when it needed refilling. She treated him exactly as she treated every other table, which she suspected, based on the way his eyes tracked her whenever she was in his peripheral range, was not what he was accustomed to. He left another envelope. Inside this one there was no tip, just a note, same precise handwriting, 7 words this time. "You're the only person here who doesn't flinch." She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it next to the first one, which was still in her uniform pocket because she had not gotten around to removing it, which was a thing she was choosing not to examine too closely. That evening, she went home to her small apartment in Washington Heights and sat on her bed and thought about Luca Ferrante in a way that was beginning to feel less like idle observation and more like something she needed to be very careful about. He was a mafia boss's son. More than that, he was the mafia boss. He was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the fact that he was unreasonably good-looking and had handwriting that made her feel like she'd received something precious. He was a man whose world had rules that would crush her quietly and completely, and she would not even see it coming. She put the notes in her nightstand drawer. She told herself that was the last time she would think about it. The next time she was at work, she was not thinking about it. She was in the middle of a genuinely terrible lunch service involving a broken espresso machine and a guest who had very specific feelings about table proximity to the window, when one of Luca's security men appeared at her elbow and said, quietly, "Mr. Ferrante would like to speak with you." Mia looked across the room to where Luca was seated, apparently alone, apparently unbothered, apparently entirely comfortable with the power of simply summoning a person and expecting them to appear. She went, because the alternative was making a scene, and she did not make scenes. She stopped at the edge of his table. He gestured to the seat across from him. She sat down because standing while he sat felt deliberately unequal, and she was already fighting the power imbalance on 12 different fronts. "You've been working here 6 weeks, he said, not a question. 7, she corrected. "Before that. That's not really relevant to my job here." "Humor me." She looked at him. He looked back. He did not look like a man who was going to blink first. She did not particularly want to blink first either, but she also had a section to manage and a broken espresso machine situation still unresolved. "I was at a French bistro in Midtown for 2 years," she said. "Before that, a hotel restaurant in the financial district. I have a hospitality management degree I'm not currently using." She paused. "Is that the kind of information you meant?" "It is," he said. He studied her face with that unhurried focus that made her feel both examined and, somehow, seen. "You're supporting someone." It was not a question. She felt a muscle in her jaw tighten. "What makes you say that?" "You're working doubles. You take the late bus home instead of a car because I checked the time difference, and the late bus saves you $11 per trip. You keep your phone on silent, but I've noticed you check it every 40 minutes, not anxiously, carefully, the way someone checks in on someone else." The accuracy of it was disorienting. She stared at him. "You're watching me." "Yes," he said simply, without apology. She should have been unsettled by that. She was a little. But she was also, in some part of herself, she was choosing not to interrogate, something else entirely. Something that felt like being found. "My mother is recovering from surgery," she said. "I help with her expenses." He nodded once. Then he picked up his espresso cup, which was already empty, and set it back down in the way men did when they were comfortable with silence. "You handled the Rixai situation well," he said. 3 weeks ago, when the wine service was wrong. That wasn't at your table." "I noticed anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is there something you actually want, Mr. Ferrante? Or are you collecting information about me for some other reason?" That look again, steady and unreadable and containing something she could not name. "I'm not sure yet," he said. And the honesty of it, the simplicity of it, was somehow more startling than anything else he could have said. Mia stood up. She smoothed her apron. She said, "Let me know when you figure it out," and went back to her section. And if her hands were not entirely steady for the next 20 minutes, she attributed that entirely to the espresso machine situation. That evening, Luca sat in the back of his car on the way to a meeting he had been looking forward to with approximately negative interest, and thought about the way Mia Carter had looked at him. Not with fear, not with calculation, not with the particular kind of careful performance that most people gave him when they understood who he was. Just direct. Like she had weighed him against something internal and arrived at a conclusion she had not yet chosen to share. He had met thousands of people. He had been assessed by politicians and rivals and diplomats, and men who thought they were his equals and men who knew they were not. Not one of them had made him feel the particular thing he felt when Mia Carter looked at him with those dark eyes and said things like, "Let me know when you figure it out." He was going to figure it out. He was going to figure it out very soon. His phone buzzed. His consigliere Aldo calling about the Marchetti shipment. He answered. He handled it. He was professional and precise, and the call lasted 4 minutes, and when it was over, he was thinking about the way she'd caught that wine glass before it fell, quick and sure, like she had already decided exactly where her hands needed to be and had simply put them there. He thought about it twice more on the way to the meeting. He did not tell Aldo. A week later, things changed. Not because of anything Luca did. Because of a man named Ryan, who was the kind of attractive that came with a surfboard and good dental coverage and absolutely no self-awareness about either. Ryan was a regular at Edder's, mid-30s, finance something, and he had been watching Mia since approximately her 3rd week on the floor. He had been doing the slow escalation that Mia recognized from 3 years of waitressing. First the extra warm smile, then the lingering at the table slightly too long, then the comments that were compliments with a question buried inside them. The evening it actually became a problem, Mia was clearing his dessert plates when Ryan said, leaning back with the particular confidence of someone who had never been told no without eventually getting a yes. "I know you're working, but I have to ask. Dinner this Saturday, just dinner." He smiled. It was a genuinely nice smile. It did not make her feel anything except tired. She started to decline, professionally and firmly, because she had a method for this, when she became aware of something in the room changing. She did not need to look, she knew. She looked anyway. Luca Ferrante was at the corner booth, which she had not known because she had been in the kitchen, and he was watching Ryan with an expression that was perfectly, immaculately, terrifyingly controlled, which somehow made it worse. An angry man, she understood. A man who looked like he had already processed his anger and arrived at a decision on the other side of it. That was different. Ryan had not noticed. Ryan was still smiling. "Thank you," Mia said, "but I don't date guests." She picked up the dessert plates and walked toward the kitchen. She did not look back. She did not need to. Later, Ryan's bill arrived with a lamb dish he had not ordered added to the total. When he brought it up to the front, the host confirmed it had been requested by management. Ryan paid it without understanding entirely why he felt it would be unwise not to. Mia found out from Marco the next morning. She stood very still when he told her. Then she said, carefully, "He can't do that." Marco gave her a look that said, quite eloquently, that he could absolutely do that and had. She spent the rest of the day and most of the evening in a low, slow burn that she told herself was anger. It was mostly anger. It was also something else, something that felt embarrassingly like being looked after, which she resented because she had not asked to be looked after and also because she liked it, which she resented even more. The next time Luca came in, she was waiting for him. Not literally. She was serving a table 3 booths away when he arrived, but she crossed to him the moment she finished, before Marco could intercept, before Luca had fully settled into the booth, and she stood at the edge of the table and said, low and direct, "You added a charge to a guest's bill." Luca looked up. "I did." "You can't do that." "The management did it. I made a suggestion." "That's the same thing and you know it." He met her gaze without flinching. "He was making you uncomfortable." "I was handling it." "You were handling it very well," he said, and the acknowledgement was so genuine and so immediate that it took some of the heat out of her argument. "You didn't need my help. I did it anyway. That was about me, not about your competence." She opened her mouth, closed it. He tilted his head slightly. "Are you going to tell me I was wrong?" "You were wrong," she said. "Yes," he agreed, still watching her. "Probably." A pause. "He wasn't going to accept your answer." She knew that. She had known that. "That's still not your decision." He said nothing, just looked at her. That slow, patient, absolutely unnerving attention. "Don't do it again," she said. "All right," he said, so simply, so directly, like it had cost him nothing, which somehow made it feel like it had cost him everything. She went back to her section. She was halfway through a dessert service before she realized her pulse had not settled. The following week, the world shifted beneath her feet in the way it sometimes did when you were not paying attention to the right things. Her mother called her during a break at work. Not about the surgery, not about the medications, but about a letter that had arrived at the apartment. From the building management. A rent increase effective next month, 31%, which was not legal under current stabilization rules, but which the building management had apparently decided was worth arguing about anyway. Mia sat in the staff room with the phone pressed to her ear and her mother's voice coming through it. Calm but careful the way her mother always was, trying not to add to the weight, and she did the math in her head and came up short on every calculation. She went back to the floor. She finished the service. She smiled at every table and refilled every glass and was pleasant to the difficult man at table 11 who had strong feelings about the bread service. And she did all of it on a very specific kind of autopilot that she had developed over years of things going wrong and life requiring you to be functional anyway. Luca was in that night, not in her section. She was aware of him the way she was always aware of him now, a kind of peripheral certainty. She did not approach him. She had no reason to. He was a guest and she was a waitress and she had a situation to resolve and it had nothing to do with him. Near the end of the night, as she was resetting tables, one of his security men appeared beside her and placed a folded piece of paper on the tablecloth. She looked at it, looked at the security man, who said nothing and stepped away. She unfolded the paper. The handwriting was the same, precise, unhurried. "You look like something is wrong. You don't have to tell me what it is." She held the note for a long moment. Then she wrote on the back of it, borrowing a pen from her apron, and folded it back and handed it to the security man. On the back she had written, "I'm fine. Thank you for asking." And then, after a pause, she had added, "It was the building." She did not know why she added it. She told herself it was just context, that it was nothing. She found out 3 days later that it was not nothing. Because 3 days later, her building manager called her mother to say that, upon review, the proposed rent increase had been found to be improperly filed and would not be going forward. He was, apparently, very apologetic about the confusion. Her mother called Mia immediately. Mia stood in the kitchen of her apartment and held the phone and felt something move through her chest that she did not have a name for. She thought about the note. She thought about those precise, careful words. She thought about a man who watched her every 40 minutes and noticed whether she was tired and had apparently, quietly, without making a thing of it, done something about a problem she had barely mentioned. She sat down on her kitchen floor because her legs felt suddenly unreliable. And she thought, with great clarity and great alarm, this is a problem. She did not confront him about the building. She thought about it for 2 days and decided that confronting him would require acknowledging that she had been thinking about it for 2 days, and she was not ready to do that. So she went to work. She waited his tables when he came in, which was still 3 times a week, like a tide that kept returning to the same shore. She treated him professionally. She was not cold, because she was not the kind of person who weaponized coldness, but she was careful. She maintained exactly the right amount of distance. She was impressively disciplined about it. He let her be disciplined. He did not push, did not press, did not do anything except be present and watch her and occasionally leave notes that were never longer than a sentence and always felt, inexplicably, like being understood. You work better when the kitchen isn't backed up. She'd caught him clocking her pace. Written in passing, not accusatory, just observed. Another evening, you should order something before your shift ends. You haven't eaten. She had almost responded to that one in person, but had stopped herself. Because responding in person meant looking at him directly, and that was becoming increasingly counterproductive to her efforts at discipline. She responded to the notes in writing, most of the time. Short answers, nothing revealing. Just enough to prevent him from thinking she was ignoring him. She told herself that was the reason, that the reason was entirely practical. 3 weeks into this arrangement, which she was not calling an arrangement, she made the mistake of looking at him at the wrong moment. It was late on a Friday. The restaurant was winding down. She was the last of the floor staff still working her section, doing a final check, when she glanced across the room and found him still at his table, not on his phone, not talking to anyone, just sitting with his glass of wine, watching the room settle. He looked, for one unguarded moment, like someone who was very alone, not unhappy, not struggling, just alone. The way a person could be alone, even in a room full of people, even when the room arranged itself around them. She looked away quickly. But the image stayed with her. It stayed with her on the bus home. It stayed with her while she made herself tea and stood at her kitchen window. It stayed with her in a way that things only stay when they have found something to anchor to. She did not want to think about what that meant. The following Saturday, she had a day off, and she spent it doing her laundry and visiting her mother and telling herself she was going to stop this entire line of thinking. She was going to be practical. She was going to remember who he was. She was going to remember that powerful men in corner booths, no matter how they watched you, no matter what they fixed quietly in the middle of the night, they did not come without cost. She had learned that a long time ago in a different context, and she did not need to relearn it. She was on her way home from her mother's apartment, on the train, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Miss Carter," his voice, unhurried as always. She gripped the phone. "How did you get this number?" "You wrote it on your staff file. I own part of Edders." A pause. "I should have disclosed that earlier." The train rattled through a tunnel. She stared at the dark windows. "You own part of Edders." 40%. The Marchetti family holds the rest. "Does that mean you?" She stopped herself, reorganized. "Does my manager know you have my number?" "No, I have people." He said it the way other men said, "I have an assistant," completely without self-consciousness. I wanted to call rather than leave another note. Notes feel insufficient tonight. The train emerged from the tunnel. The city lights came back in through the windows. Why tonight specifically? Because I've been thinking about something for 3 weeks, and I've run out of patience with myself. She said nothing. The train moved. Her pulse moved with it. I want to take you to dinner, he said. Not at Edder's, not with my security team in the background, somewhere quiet, just you and me. A pause. I know what I am. I'm not asking you to pretend I'm something else. I'm asking you to let me show you something that isn't the corner booth. She closed her eyes, thought about the building, thought about the notes, thought about the way he looked at her, and she felt like herself. That's an enormous thing to ask, she said. I know. You're complicated. Yes. You're dangerous. Yes. I don't do complicated and dangerous. A long pause, long enough that she wondered if she'd said the wrong thing. Then he said quietly, No one has ever told me yes and meant it. I think you'd be the first. She sat with that for a moment. The train stopped. A few people got off. One dinner, she said. Just dinner. Just dinner, he agreed. And she could not see his face, but she could hear something shift very slightly in his voice, like a door that had been closed for a very long time had just opened 1 inch. The restaurant he chose was small and had no sign outside. It was in a neighborhood she didn't know, up a flight of stairs, and the table he'd reserved was in a corner by a window overlooking a courtyard lit by string lights. When she arrived, he was already there, which surprised her. She had expected a powerful man to be late. He was not late. He stood when she walked in, which surprised her more. You stood up, she said. My grandmother would haunt me if I didn't, he said. She sat down. He sat down. The waiter came. They ordered. And then, for the first time in all the weeks of watching and notes and careful professional distance, they talked. Not the way people talked when there was a power dynamic in the room, but the way people talked when they had both decided, just for the length of a dinner, to be honest with each other. He told her about his grandmother's house in Palermo and the way the light fell through the kitchen windows in the early morning. He told her he had not chosen this life deliberately so much as it had been the shape of everything around him from birth, and that there were days he understood his father and days he did not, and that both things were true simultaneously. He said it without asking for sympathy, just as a fact about himself, offered plainly. She told him about her mother, about the surgery and the recovery and the particular fear of watching a parent become fragile. She told him about the hospitality degree she had gotten while working 2 jobs, and how she had this idea, stubborn and persistent and probably impractical, of eventually opening something small. Something that felt like the opposite of places like Edder's, where people came not to perform, but to just be somewhere good. He listened the way he did everything, with complete attention. No phone, no distraction, just that focused, unhurried presence that she had felt across a restaurant for weeks and now felt across a table that was significantly smaller. You'd be good at it, he said, about the restaurant idea. You don't know that. I've watched you work for 2 months. I know exactly what you'd be good at. He looked at her with those dark eyes over the rim of his water glass. I know that you calm rooms down just by being in them. I know that you remember details about guests from weeks earlier. I know you make difficult things feel simple. Those are not small skills, Mia. It was the first time he'd used her first name. She heard it land in her chest. Luca, she said, just to even the ground. His expression changed, just slightly, like the first name hit him somewhere too. They finished dinner slowly, in no hurry, and when they finally left and stood on the pavement in the cool night air, she thought, I am in so much trouble. He walked her to the car he'd called for her, which she'd told him she didn't need but had not argued against very strenuously. He opened the door. She got in. He stood at the curb and looked at her through the window, and she looked back, and there was something in his expression that she had not seen before. Not control, not patience. Something underneath all of that, something unguarded and wanting and carefully held in check. She rode home and told herself one dinner was fine. One dinner was nothing. One dinner did not change the math. She knew she was lying. By the end of that week, she had been to dinner with him twice more. On the third dinner, he reached across the table and adjusted her watch, which had slid around her wrist, and his fingers stayed at her wrist for one breath longer than the task required. She did not pull away. The danger, when it arrived, did not announce itself. It was a Wednesday evening. Mia was finishing a late shift, the restaurant almost empty, when she stepped outside through the staff exit to wait for her car and found herself standing across from two men she didn't know. They were not guests. They were not staff. They were the particular kind of men who seemed to exist outside of normal categories, very still, very deliberate, very aware of every exit point. One of them said, "Tell Ferrante that the Galuzzo family sends its regards, and that the girl is a liability." She did not scream. She did not run. She stood very still, heart hammering somewhere behind her sternum, and said, in the steadiest voice she had, "I don't know what you're talking about." The man tilted his head, smiled slowly. "You will." Then they were gone, into a car that pulled away before she could see the plate. She stood on the pavement for 10 seconds. Then she went back inside, found a seat at the empty bar, and called Luca. He picked up on the second ring. She told him what had happened, slowly, clearly, not leaving anything out. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted approximately 4 seconds, which she was already learning was Luca's version of a strong reaction. "Are you still inside?" he said. "Yes." "Don't leave, I'm on my way." A pause. "I'm sorry." She heard something in the last 2 words that she had never heard in his voice before. Something that was not composure. He arrived in 14 minutes. She knew he had been across the city because she had overheard him canceling a meeting on the phone as he walked through the door, and he had walked through the front door rather than the staff entrance, which meant he had not been thinking about procedure, only about getting to her. He found her at the bar. He looked at her the way she imagined someone looked when they had spent 14 minutes imagining worst-case scenarios and arrived to find the reality more manageable than the imagining. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved over her face like he was conducting an inventory. "You're all right," he said, like he needed to say it out loud. "I'm all right." He sat down beside her, close, the kind of close that was about presence, not propriety. "This was the Galuzzo family. There is a disagreement between our operations. They were trying to send me a message through you." He stopped. Something moved through his expression. "They used you because they think you matter to me." She held his gaze. "Do I?" He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the window, she could see 2 of his security team positioned at the entrance, 2 more at the corner. He had deployed resources before she had even finished telling him what happened. "Yes," he said, simply, completely. "You matter to me in ways that are becoming difficult to qualify." She breathed. "That's a problem, Luca, if I'm a target." "You're protected," he said. "You have been since the 3rd week, you just didn't know it." He paused. "That was wrong of me, to protect you without telling you. You had a right to know. I was—" He stopped again. "I was trying not to frighten you." She thought about the 40-minute check-ins she'd never noticed. About the man who had never once appeared threatening in all the nights she'd walked to the bus alone. About how easily those weeks could have been different if someone had decided differently, and how he had quietly decided otherwise without asking her permission or her gratitude. "You can't make those decisions for me," she said. "I know. You have to tell me things." "Yes." He was looking at her with that open, unguarded expression again, the one she'd only seen in unguarded moments, the one that made him look less like an empire and more like a man. "I'm telling you now, all of it, whatever you want to know." She asked him. He answered. For the next hour, she asked and he told her everything she wanted to know and some things she hadn't known to ask. About the family, about the operations, about what his life was, clearly and without softening it. And he watched her face while he talked, she could tell, watching to see what she would do with the information, watching for the point where she would stand up and leave. She did not stand up. When he finished, she sat with it for a long time. Then she said, "I'm not going to pretend this is simple." "It isn't. And I'm not going to pretend I'm not scared. You shouldn't be anything other than honest with me. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't know who you are to me. She met his eyes. Because I do, I've known for a while. Something in his expression did exactly what it had been doing for weeks, broke open. Just slightly, just enough. He reached across the bar and took her hand. They stayed like that for a moment, the empty restaurant around them, the city outside the windows, his security at the door. Just that. His hand over hers on the bar. It felt like everything. The weeks that followed were not simple. The Galuzzo situation escalated before it resolved. There was a period of 10 days during which Luca's security presence around her doubled, and she was driven to and from work every shift, and she did not argue about this, because she had decided that choosing this meant accepting the reality of it, not just the parts that felt like being looked after. She met Aldo, his consigliere, who regarded her with the careful assessment of someone who understood that she had already done what no one before her had managed, gotten past the wall. She met 2 of his lieutenants. She learned the names of his security team because it felt important, because they were people, and because it turned out that learning their names made them look at her differently, more warmly, in a way she hadn't expected. One evening, Luca arrived at her apartment. He had been to her apartment several times now, for dinner, for evenings that stretched long with conversation and music, and a particular comfortable quiet she had not known she was missing, and he brought her a set of keys. Not to his place. To a space 2 blocks from Edder's that he had apparently leased 6 weeks earlier and had not told her about. "What is this?" she said, holding the keys. "A space," he said, 3,500 square feet, commercial zoning, good kitchen layout according to someone I had assessed it." He paused. "It's yours. If you want it, no conditions. I had it put in your name." She looked at the keys in her palm, looked at him. "Luca, you should have your restaurant," he said. It was the most direct, the most uncomplicated thing she had ever heard from him. Not a gesture of power, not a demonstration of wealth, just this is what you want and you should have it. "I'm not asking for anything in return. I know that matters to you." He looked at her steadily. "I just want you to have the thing you want." She stood in her kitchen holding the keys to a restaurant she hadn't opened yet, looking at a man who was the most complicated and the most straightforward person she had ever met. And she felt something settle in her chest like it was finally arriving somewhere it was supposed to be. She crossed the kitchen. She reached up. She kissed him, and he responded with his whole self, arms around her, careful and completely present, not performing but just there, just that, just the 2 of them in her kitchen with the city outside and the keys still in her hand. The Galuzzo conflict resolved over the following month, resolved the way things in his world resolved, through negotiation and pressure, and a demonstration of what happened to people who reached toward things that belonged to Luca Ferrante. She did not ask for the details. He offered the outcomes. She accepted that there were parts of his world she would stand at the edge of rather than step into, and he accepted that this was her right. The restaurant opened on a Tuesday evening in April, small and warm and exactly what she had described to him over their first dinner, the one where she had not yet admitted to herself that she was falling. She had called it Mia's, simply, which had made him smile in that way of his, that almost smile that was somehow always more than it appeared. He came to the opening as a guest. He sat at a small table near the window. He did not bring security inside, which she had asked for because she wanted the space to feel safe and warm and accessible, and he had arranged it. He had arranged it and not mentioned it. When the last guests left that night, he was still there. She came out of the kitchen and sat across from him at the small table by the window, and they both looked at the restaurant together. "You did this," he said. "You helped." The space was the easy part. He looked at her. Everything in it was you. She looked back at him. In the low light of her own restaurant, with the scent of the kitchen still warm in the air, he looked, for the first time without the armor of the corner booth or the weight of the empire, or the particular way powerful men hold themselves in rooms full of people who are afraid of them. He looked, simply, like a man who was somewhere he wanted to be. "I love you," she said, because she was done being disciplined about it. He went very still, the way he went still when something reached him past all the layers. Then he said, "I've been in love with you since the night you walked across a room to solve a problem that wasn't yours. I've been trying to figure out how to be someone worth that since then." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You already are," she said. He turned his hand over and held hers. There were things still to navigate. There always would be. His world did not stop being what it was because she had stepped into the edge of it. Her restaurant did not run itself. Her mother needed a proper apartment, closer to her, which Luca arranged quietly, and she accepted because she had decided that accepting things from him did not diminish her. It meant she trusted him, and she did, entirely. He asked her to move in with him 3 months after the opening. She said yes, and then told him that if anything in his apartment was going to change, she was going to be the one who changed it, and he said, absolutely, and she could tell he meant it. He proposed on a Thursday evening, which she later told him was a strange choice, and he said he had been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, and Thursday was when he finally ran out of patience with himself, which she recognized as entirely characteristic, and which made her laugh and say yes before he had finished the sentence. They married in September, quietly, in a ceremony that had 14 guests and her mother in the front row, and Aldo wiping his eyes discreetly in the corner. Luca's family was there. His grandmother, aged and sharp and absolutely certain about Mia from the moment she met her, had told her, in Italian that Luca translated, that she had been waiting 40 years for someone to look at this boy like he was worth looking at. Mia had held the old woman's hands and said, "He is worth it." The morning she told him about the pregnancy, he was in the kitchen before her, making espresso, his back to the door. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she spoke, watching him, this man who was an empire and also, somehow, just this. A person moving around her kitchen in the early light, putting 2 cups on the counter without being asked because he already knew she'd be there in a minute. "Luca." He turned. She told him. He set down the espresso cup. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. He held her face in both hands with that particular carefulness she had come to understand was not restraint but reverence, and he looked at her for a long moment, dark eyes and everything in them. "You're sure," he said. "I'm sure." He pressed his forehead against hers. His hands were completely steady. Hers were too. "You did the impossible," he said, so quietly it was almost just breath. She thought about a girl in a second-hand apron, about a wine glass caught before it fell, about notes on white paper and a building that didn't raise the rent and a space 2 blocks from Edder's with the keys in her palm. "We both did," she said. And in the kitchen of their apartment with the city coming alive outside the windows, Luca Ferrante, the man no one could handle, the man who made rooms go quiet and made rivals go careful, and had never in his life looked at anyone the way he looked at this woman, held her close, and decided that whatever the world required of him, whatever the empire demanded, whatever the cost of who he was, this was worth all of it. She had steady hands. She had always known where to put them. And she had put them, once and completely, on the only man who had ever needed her the way she needed to be needed. The rest was just the story they'd keep telling, together. This has been No One Could Handle the Mafia Boss's Son, until a poor waitress did the impossible. Thank you so much for watching, besties. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mafia Home Tailies for more stories like this one. We'll see you in the next one.